So there are a couple more things. The next part is looking at function calling with Azure OpenAI Service. So this is a preview feature and really a great feature. So now you can use functions within your Azure OpenAI service. So you can just call the chat completion API with your functions as well as with your user input. And you can also use the model's response to call your API or function. And finally, you can call the chat completions API again to include the response from your function to get a final response. So basically, it says it doesn't need to be just an input getting an output. You can also intercept that with functions in between. And also you can do parallel function calls in this. So you can call multiple functions together and allowing them to run in parallel and you can retrieve the results. Because when you are doing parallel function calling, that is going to reduce the number of calls to the API that needs to be made and it can improve the overall performance. So for instance, if you have a weather app, right, and you want to get the weather information for multiple locations at the same time, that is a good use case of how you can do parallel function calling. So basically, how do you work with function calling? Pretty straightforward. You define the function, you manage the flow of the functions, and you use prompt engineering with the functions. And that's the three things that you have to really do. When you are using functions with your OpenAI service, make sure that you are calling the functions responsibly. Because typical to any AI system, when you are using function calling to integrate language models, it can bring in some potential risks. So that you need to make sure what are the risks associated with function calling and you need to make sure that you use those capabilities in a responsible way. So some of the tips how you can use your function safely and securely is always validate your function calls. This is checking the parameters and making sure the call aligns with the intended action. Use trusted data and tools only. And follow the principle of least privilege, which means grant only minimum access necessary for the function to perform its job. And always consider the real world impact. Sometimes you have to think about, for instance, I'm going to execute this function. And if the function, what is the function actually trying to do? Is it executing some code? Is it executing some database activities? Or is it sending notifications? And last but not the least, always implement user confirmation steps just to make sure that the user gives a confirmation before the action is getting executed. So keep that in mind when you are using functions with Azure OpenAI service, use that in a responsible way.